Our next speaker is Rob Boyd. Rob Boyd is professor in the School of Human Evolution and Social Change and associate director and research scientist in the Institute of Human Origins at ASU. Professor Boyd is a forerunner in the field of cultural evolution. His research focuses on the evolutionary psychology of mechanisms that give rise to and influence human culture and how these mechanisms interact with population dynamic processes to shape human cultural variation. His research is published in high-impact journals such as Nature and PNAS. He has written numerous books, and one of his books, Culture and the Evolutionary Process, won the prestigious J.I. Staley Prize. His most recent book, A Different Kind of Animal, How Culture Transformed Our Species, was published in November 2018. He is also a fellow of the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation. Please join me in welcoming Rob Boyd.
Thank you, Johannes. All right. So today I want to talk to you about why humans are such peculiar creatures and how evolution created that. But before I do, I want to talk about something that at first will seem completely unrelated. I'll come around to tell you how they're related about halfway through the talk. So in 1860, the worthies of the city of Melbourne decided to organize a large expedition to explore the Australian interior. And they recruited two guys, Robert Burke, he's the guy in the pith helmet, and who was a former commander in the war in the Black Sea against the Russians, and William Wills, who was a scientist and a cartographer. So they started north in August, and by mid-November, they reached this place here, which is a place called Cooper's Creek, in the middle of Australia, about a third of the way to their goal, which was to get to the Gulf of Carpentaria. And they waited around for about a month. Most of the rest of the party was still straggling behind them. And so, desperate, worried that the whole thing was going to fall apart, they took off north, heading for the Gulf of Carpentaria. And unfortunately, it took them 4 months to get there and back. They had told the party they left, stick around for 3 months. If we don't get back in 3 months, we're dead. Well, they didn't get back in 3 months. And they were pretty close to dead. They were exhausted. They'd exhausted their provisions, shot and eaten all their camels, and there were 600 kilometers between them and Melbourne. So they were in bad shape. And right about this time, they were visited by a group of Aboriginal people called the Yandrawanda, and the Yandrawanda gave these four, actually there's only three at this point, one of them's died already, white Australians, apparently about 6 kilograms of fish, which they greatly appreciated. Then they disappeared. A couple weeks later, they met the Yandrawanda again, and, oops, that's wrong, okay, be careful. Yeah, okay. So they met another group of Yandrawanda who invited them to their camp and provided them with cakes made out of a ground seed. I see different things than you see. They really liked these cakes. They were really hungry, and so they decided they had to figure out how to make them. By the time they decided this, Yandrawanda were gone again, and so they tried to find out themselves. Wills, particularly, who was quite an experienced bush guy in Australia, after a couple of weeks, figured out that it was this plant here. This is a aquatic fern, and the seeds aren't actually seeds, they're sporocarps. But anyway, they could grind them up, and they started making nardoo flour in quantity. They had lots of food. But despite having plenty of food to eat and and they quite liked the Nardoo cakes they were making. By early July, both Burke and Wills were dead. And the fourth member of the team, the only one who hadn't died, a fellow named King, he was found by the Ondawanda in really bad shape. They took him in, took care of him for several months, until about a year later, a party looking for Burke and Wills arrived from Melbourne. So the question is, why did Burke and Wills die in a land that for the Ondawanda had plenty of food? People had been living in this part of Australia for something like 50,000 years. And this question of why Burke and Wills couldn't make it, and in a place where people could make it quite easily, is related to the larger question I want to talk about, which is why humans are such an exceptional species. Okay, now we get to the mandatory picture. This is our founder, Lucy. Our founder meaning IHO's founder. So Lucy lived about 3.2 million years ago. To a first approximation, she was just another ape, albeit with a sort of odd way of getting around. Like other apes, as Joan told us, they probably lived in small groups, limited cooperation. They probably used simple tools. Chimpanzees use simple tools. Males were much bigger than females, and their range was a modest part of East Africa. So now here's the thing. Every single person in this room, every single person in the world is descended, literally descended from a creature something like Lucy. And in the meantime, between 3.2 million years and now, there's been a fantastic transformation in the properties of our species. We're nothing at all, well, not nothing at all, we're very different, I should say, from other apes. And Kim Hill in his talk devotes the entire talk to this, documenting that humans are an exceptional species. I'll just say if we take even the simplest zoological criteria, species range, biomass, energy processing, humans are completely off the charts compared to any other vertebrate. We are extremely good at converting energy and biomass into humans, much better than any other organism. What's more, so that's one interesting thing. We're really good at adapting. But what's also true is we do a bunch of weird stuff that doesn't make very much sense that other animals don't do. So this is the Hillary Step on the South Col route of Mount Everest. It's only about 200 feet below the summit. You can almost see the summit at the top. I count 39 people in this picture. They're all miserable, every single one of them, I guarantee you that. And on average, 2 of them will die participating in this activity. The mortality rate of Everest expeditions is about 5%. Not much glory either. Almost 7,000 people have reached the summit of Mount Everest as of January of this year. Okay, so people do a bunch of stuff like climbing mountains that makes no adaptive sense. We have some graduate students in the room. You're going to graduate school, you're not having children, you're delaying marriage. That makes no adaptive sense. You know, people they believe in things that there's no empirical evidence for whatsoever. I won't detail that too much, but you know, they believe in supernatural causes and they cooperate in groups of millions, et cetera, et cetera. So the list goes on and on. People do a bunch of odd stuff. Other creatures, like rats and baboons, mainly behave in a way that makes sense. You never catch a baboon going up a Mount Everest. So the question is, how did this happen? Why are humans so good at adapting and at the same time do so much weird stuff? Okay. Now here's the standard answer. Normally I show a picture of Yogi the Bear here, but this is a better, Yogi always said I'm smarter than the average bear. This is a paper that just came out this month in Nature Reviews Psychology, and I highly recommend it. It's a really terrific paper. It's two neuroscientists at Carnegie Mellon who review the evidence that, so we have big brains, right? We know that brains got bigger over the last 2 million years. They review the evidence that our brains are more densely packed with neurons, there's more connections. And then they review the experimental evidence that this leads to a generalized increase in what they call cognitive information capacity. We have more memory, we learn faster, we can make more connections. Just to give you one example, so there's a test that comparative psychologists do where there's 3 objects, 3 cups essentially on a table, and the participant has got to learn to turn over the cup that's different than the other 2 to get the treat underneath. And to get 90% accuracy, chimps need a little more than 2,000 trials. To get 90% accuracy, 6-year-old kids need 96 trials. And this paper is full of examples of how this larger, more densely packed human brain makes us better at computing stuff. And they go on at some length how it's not some silver bullet like symbolic reasoning or recursion or something like that that makes people good. People are just better at solving all kinds of problems. Anyway, now what I'm going to try to convince you of is that can't be the whole story. People are smarter than other creatures, but as exceptionally smart as we are, it's not nearly enough to explain our ecological success. And the punchline basically is, to be a successful human in almost any environment, you have to figure out way too many things to that the smartest person couldn't come close to. And this is where the Burke-Wills expedition is relevant. So the Burke-Wills story is an example of what I call the lost European explorer experiments. So this experiment, for better or worse, has been repeated many times over the last few centuries. Some group of Europeans goes off, they're exploring some place, something goes wrong, they run aground, or something happens, there's lots of examples, and they get stranded in unfamiliar habitat, whereupon often they starve. And if they don't starve, it's often because some local group of people takes pity on them and helps them out. Now, the point is that Burke and Wills and Sir John Franklin and all the other explorers who got lost and starved to death, they had the same big brains as everybody in this room and other people have, packed with neurons, could do all the good things that are documented in that paper. But they couldn't solve the problems. And they couldn't solve the problems not because they were stupid, so to speak. They couldn't solve the problems because they didn't have access to the culturally accumulated knowledge that local people have, so that Jan Rwanda have. Now, so why did they starve? Well, it's an interesting story. They had plenty of Nardoo. Why did they die? Well, what they didn't know is that Nardoo, this fern, contains an enzyme that breaks down vitamin B1 in your intestine when you eat it. And if you make a diet that's pretty much 100% Nardoo, you get beriberi. And so Nardoo is basically poison. And this is a problem that hunter-gatherers or actually anybody who lives on a plant-rich diet has to deal with. Plants are full of toxins, and you have to learn how to detoxify them. If human intelligence alone was what made people so successful, then Burke and Wills should have been able to figure out how to detoxify the Nardoo like the like the Yonder did. And people sometimes say to me, that's no fair, that's too much to expect. How could you expect people to solve all these problems? But this is exactly the way most animals do phenotypic plasticity. Individuals have to figure stuff out with their genetic endowment, what information they can glean from the environment, and a few animals like chimps have social information can be useful, but the evidence is that chimps can make it without the social information. So can baboons, so can all kinds of other animals. So the social information, there are small traditions like nutcracking, but there's no accumulation. Nothing goes better and better, or more and more complicated, more and more adaptive over many generations. And so social information is helpful, but not essential. But in humans, social information is completely essential. It's what allows humans to adapt to such a wide range of environments. The Yonder could live in Central Australia because they were heir to all this knowledge. Now, are any archaeologists here? No. Oh, there's one. The Australian Aborigines are famous, another one. Two more. Are famous among archaeologists for having a very simple material culture. But nonetheless, if you start thinking about what the book, the Yonder Instruction Manual for Useful Technology, would look like, it'd be, a pretty thick book. Would have to cover all kinds of stuff. So the fish that the Yonder gave Burke and Wills were caught with a net. And to make a net, you have to make cordage. And to make cordage, you have to know how to choose the right plant. You have to know how to ret the plant to get the fibers out. And then you have to be able to make a net. And this is a net in the Australian Museum in Adelaide. It's 50 meters long. It's a fishing net. Pretty complicated piece of knotting. You have to know how to make baskets. You have to know how to make fire drills. You have to know how to make canoes, spears and spear throwers. And then the list just goes on and on and on. Boomerangs, poisons, adhesives, shields. And this is just the material stuff. There'd be another volume, which would be the Yonder Natural History Handbook, and it would have to go into stuff like how you hunt, how to find water, how to process toxic ferns, yams, cycads, and so on. There's this immense pool of information, and it's beyond, I hope you will agree, the capacity of individual humans to figure out. Humans are able to adapt to the environments that they are because they adapt as populations, accumulating information over time. Now, the next question becomes is, how does this work? Why, okay, so people are out there, they're doing stuff that's hard to learn. Why is it that this pool of cultural information is useful? And it's kind of surprising. There's been an amazingly small amount of serious attention to this problem, at least of the serious quantitative kind. But I think the common understanding, you see it in a lot of places, is it's hard to learn these things. Once you've got them, it's pretty easy to see that they work. And so people figure out that, for example, you can process nardoo by rinsing it many times in fresh water. And that's what the Yonder did. And then once it is discovered, it remains because people understand what it's good for. They understand why it works. And so it is maintained through time. But it's not clear this is true. And I'm going to present an example, and then I'm going to wave my arms about some models that suggest that it's not true. And in fact, well, I'll get to what it is then. So the question is, why did the Yonder, did they understand why they processed the nardoo, and did they understand the why and wherefore of the way they did it. We don't know anything about the Yonderwanda, sadly. Guns, germs, and steel did their usual business shortly after they were visited by Burke and Wills, a few decades even, especially smallpox, I guess. Anyway, but we do know quite a bit about food processing traditions in contemporary societies. So I want to show you, I'm going to finish up by showing you a little data from a study that Joe Henrich and his colleagues, including me, have conducted in this rather nice place, Yasawa Village, Tethi Village on Yasawa Island in Fiji. So this is a horticultural society. About 80% of the calories that people consume come from the garden or the ocean. The rest is mainly cooking oil and crackers that they like with their tea. They grow yams and cassava and bananas. And then they get a lot of calories and protein and fat from the ocean, from fish and from invertebrates and turtles. And many of the marine species in their diet have toxins. And one of the most important one is a fat-soluble toxin called Cingulata that accumulates in the tissues of consumers as they go up the food chain, because it's fat-soluble. And so it's especially concentrated in barracuda and shark, and it also concentrates in very long-lived organisms like this turtle, who is giving his all for the village of Tevi. And Cingulata poisoning is quite nasty. It has a bunch of neurological symptoms and you get joint pain, you get oddly, hot things feel cold and cold things feel hot, diarrhea, vomiting, convulsions, and finally death. And it's especially harmful to fetuses and nursing infants. So, the Fijians have traditions to deal with this. So they have taboos that, this is just one of the traditions they have to deal with it, that taboos, and tambu is the Fijian word, and Captain Cook borrowed taboo from Tonga, but so this is actually a taboo, and just those animals that are most dangerous, cod, barracuda, moray eel, shark, sea turtle, are the ones that are tabooed. The things they eat a lot, shellfish, sweets, yams, cassava is probably a third of the calories, aren't tabooed at all. And there's some things in the middle that are interesting that I don't have time to talk about. Okay, so they've got cultural beliefs, this is one of several, that help them deal with the toxins in the Cingulata toxin. So where do they get these beliefs? Henrich and his colleagues asked a sample of Fijians where they learned their beliefs about who can eat what. And you can see that only a small fraction of people said they learned it for themselves. Almost everybody learned it because somebody else told them. Mainly relatives, but also this group of women, so-called wise women. This is a social role in the village, Yalewa Vuku. These are women that are known to know things about pregnancy, traditional medicine, childbirth, stuff like that. And the one who I knew was an exceptionally smart person. And so mainly people are getting this because other people tell them it's true. But then the question is, why should we believe? Why do they believe, those people? And if the story that I told you earlier, that people acquire this because they understand why it works, and they maintain it because they understand why it works, then they should be able to tell you why it is that pregnant women shouldn't be eating turtles, say. Turtle is delicious, I have to say. after eating whitefish and cassava for a month, turtle is fatty and rich and delicious. So here's a woman sitting at a feast, and the turtle is there, and she's pregnant. She has to believe strong enough not to dive into that delicious turtle to obey the taboo against it. So why do they do that? And do they do it because they understand it might hurt their baby? But it looks like the answer to that is no. So Henrik interviewed, and his team, including me, interviewed a number of women about, actually a fairly large sample of women, about what they believed would happen to a pregnant or lactating woman if they ate turtle or they ate shark. And the majority said, I don't know. People who gave an answer often gave an answer that said something bad would happen to the baby, but there was no agreement about what that might be. So, for example, some of the symptoms that might happen would be rough skin or smelly joints. And so I think these responses are consistent with the hypothesis that people acquired this because most people believe it's true. And then when cornered by the anthropologist and asked to provide a reason, they think of something. You can build mathematical models of a process like this in which occasionally people learn and then they also imitate the successful or imitate the healthy. And the model suggests that this process can maintain adaptive traits at quite high frequency. And experiments by people like my former postdoc, Max Durex, and others, lab experiments more or less confirm these mathematical models. Of course, we don't know for sure if that's what's going on in TEDI. Okay, so that's a picture of a story about how human populations accumulate knowledge that allows them to be so successful. And it also, I think, provides an entree to explaining why people do so many weird things. This form of adaptation has a built-in trade-off. This pool of information is a vast reservoir of useful stuff on the cheap. You don't have to figure it out again for yourself. You can just copy other people. But that means that if bad ideas get into that pool, they'll be spread and maintained for exactly the same reason. So bad ideas like climbing Mount Everest or going to graduate school. Okay, I think this shift to cultural adaptation, a mode of adaptation that allows human populations to accumulate useful adaptive knowledge that most people in the population don't understand at much lower cost than otherwise, is one of the major transitions in the history of life. It's like the evolution of multicellularity or eukaryotes or oxygenic photosynthesis. It created a new kind of animal with a supercharged ability to adapt. And for better or worse, you can see what the result of that is in the world. And at the same time, it led to art, language, trade, war, religion, etc. Thanks.